Hey guys, before we get started today, I want to let you know about two books that were super instrumental in my Little Season series, and I hope you all go check out. First, Ed Mabry's The Little Season of Satan, Hidden History or Hidden Agenda, who I've had the pleasure of working with in a future episode of The Confessionals, and also Tracy Laban's book, Jesus Keeps His Word, Uncovering the Little Season Heresy, which I use extensively in episodes 1 and 4, is a direct response to Jesus Kept His Word, the Mysterious Roberts book, The Return of Jesus and Where We Are Now in the Biblical Timeline. And that's the pamphlet that promotes the little season I've been referencing throughout the series. Her hermeneutical knowledge and biblical expertise was foundational through everything I presented thus far and is a go-to biblical defense of the Word of God. Again, go check out these books and make sure you're giving them a 5 stars as well if you appreciate what they do.
Merkel Media.
It's kind of simple, but it's not. We try a million paths, we're lost. Accolades without the cost. Fighting just to fight, I'm exhausted. Looking for everything in the shadows. Start looking at people like they don't matter. I'm waking up to the fact, more than a little bit shallow. I'm lost down this hole, but I don't wanna. I'm lost down this hole, 'cause I'm just trying to free the rabbits, yeah. Free the rabbits, yeah. Free 'em, free 'em, free 'em, free the rabbits. Free 'em, free 'em, free 'em, free 'em, free 'em, the
What's up, guys? We are back with the final and 6th episode of the Little Season Conspiracy, and I'm excited to wrap this entire over 12 hours that it's going to be by the time we finish today's episode. And I hope that I've gone through things as thoroughly as possible for the people that never knew what the Little Season Conspiracy was, for people that were on the fence about it, for people that were against it, and for people that were for. However, I think the people that were for, a lot of them probably hightailed it out about 20 minutes into the first episode by their own admission. But at least for the people that are wanting to know about it and hear both sides of it, by listening to what the purveyors of the Little Season Conspiracy would say, and then also adversely listen to what I have to say about it. And I hope that I've come with the most unbiased approach to this. Do I have a certain bias in this? Well, yeah, I am a believer in a pre-tribulation rapture, but I didn't come to that by just sitting back in my throne of pre-tribulation and condemning. No, I went down a road of preterism, partial preterism that led into the Little Season for me to then come out of it and say, this is how I feel about this new eschatology that's taken the world by storm. Somehow taken the world by storm, and yet in Satan's little season where he rules over everything, he hasn't tried to snuff it out in the slightest. As a matter of fact, he's letting all of these Little Season videos get hundreds and thousands and millions of views all over the place for some odd reason. So again, we're just trying to get to the bottom of it through thorough research. Now, I've gone into everything so far, guys. We went into tons of proof verses that they use. We've used hermeneutics, the Koine Greek and the Hebrew to showcase what those verses actually mean. We've talked about how long the little season should actually be. To that point, we've also gone into new chronology and chronology criticism. We've gone into Anatoly Fomenko. We've gone into Gunnar Heinsohn. We've gone into people who influence them. We've talked about what they think about Jesus. We've gone into the origins of preterism. We've gone into the origins of pre-tribulation and the rapture. We have gone into the rest of the dead, the Mandela effect. We've gone into perfected animals and what the Bible says about that in the end times. So today we're going to go into probably the wildest aspects. And I know you're probably sitting there saying, how could it get any wilder than what I've already heard, especially after the last 2 episodes with the Mandela effect, and then subsequently the time changes in new chronology and what those guys actually thought about who Jesus was. It gets wilder. And today's episode's just going to get into really the things that ultimately don't have a whole lot to do with the Bible. There'll be some Bible verses that are used to support their ideas, but we will go into what those Bible verses actually mean. Do they actually connect to the things they're saying? Today, we are going to talk about Tartaria. We can't get away from the little season without talking about it. And to preface it ahead of time, just like the last episode when we were talking about new chronology, this isn't an entire episode breaking down Tartaria and all the machinations of it, just like we didn't do with new chronology. No, this is about how Tartaria links to the little season, and if we can take it on board as Christians. That's the most important thing. It's not about if we think some of these conspiracy theories have some interesting aspects to them, which I do think Tartaria has some things that raise questions for sure. I just don't think it's what they say that it is, and I definitely don't think that it has anything to do with this supposed already 1,000-year millennial reign of Christ in the slightest. And we'll get into that too. Today, we're going to talk about meltology. That's one that little seasoners point to all the time. And we're going to explain the verse in the Bible that talks about that. We're going to talk about Pangea and how they think that Pangea was actually during the time of Jesus Christ, which is insane when we look at what the Bible would say to correlate with that. We're going to talk about 1776 being the Independence Day of Satan. And if that holds any validity at all, we're going to talk about 12-foot light being saints with halos that are in the North Pole. To that point, we're going to talk about is the New Jerusalem and Jesus and the camp of the saints hiding out in the North Pole while the rest of us suffer here on earth. We're going to talk about hagiography and how that there are some mysterious supposed documents that little seasoners are peddling out there, saying that through AI that they could hack into the Vatican secret files and pull these documents out that prove that there are light being saints and the camp of the saints is in the North Pole. And we're also going to talk about Sikhism and how that Sikhism in little season eschatology is supposedly the precursor to Hinduism and was actually a form of Christianity. And we're going to go into what Sikhism actually is and if it at all lines up to Christian beliefs in the Bible. All right, guys, real quick before we jump back into the show, our new film, The Meadow Project, is out now at merkelfilms.com. It's a wild ride full of paranormal research and activity, and we just added over 2 hours of additional footage for all of you to enjoy. Also, if you want to support me here on YouTube, go become a member. We have 3 different tiers and custom emojis for you to use right here on this channel. Lastly, if you're looking for some great merch to wear this fall and winter, go to freetherabbits.myshopify.com for tons of options. And we are always updating the store with new merch. All right, guys, let's get back into the show. But we are going to start out with our good friend, Mysterious Robert. Jesus kept his word. He wrote the very important pamphlet to little seasoners, The Return of Jesus and Where We Are Now on the Biblical Timeline. And if you'll remember from the Mandela Effect episode, he also wrote a book about the Mandela Effect changing the Bible and ties it into the little season. So this Mysterious Robert, which I'm going to reiterate again, at some point, He may reveal himself to the world, and you may hear this episode months from now, and he already has. So just know, by the current dating of me recording this guy has been kept a secret by the Little Season community. And he's made it known in his books that he will continue to remain in secret because he doesn't want the backlash from people around the world, which I don't think that he would receive right now, because in the mainstream truther world, the Little Season is up there with Flat Earth, Mandela Effect, Tartaria, any of the hot mainstream conspiracy theories. It's right up there with it. So the guy wouldn't be shunned at this point. He'd be probably hailed as a hero at this point. His book is riddled with holes, and we're using it as a basis to go through all of these ideas, and we can look at it thoroughly and say, is there some weight to it, or is it really just a lot of conjecture, a lot of confirmation bias, a lot of things we've been talking about this entire series? So we're going to get into meltology. We're going to read a little bit about what he has to say. He says, working on the basis that Jesus has already returned, just like he said he would. And he does a lot of all caps in this to make sure you know that he said he would. So this means that it's true. And we've gone thoroughly through the so-called proof verses and how that those don't add up when we use hermeneutics. He goes on to say the tribulation, resurrection of the saints, and most of the events of Revelation will have already happened, coinciding with the destruction of the temple and return of Jesus. The vile judgments will have already been poured out on the world during what was literally the end times or end of the age, as spoken of by Jesus and imminently expected by the apostles and all believers at the time. So make sure you go back to episode 2, Origins of Preterism. I go into the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, the 7 bowls. We go into how horrific those things actually would be and how they would change the literal landscape of the world itself, which we haven't seen. And we're going to go into maps before Jesus here in a little bit, in conjunction with the supposed idea that the deserts on the earth coincide with these horrific events. Now, these are horrific events. These would have changed the landscape of everything. So many people would have perished, died, all of these things. He goes on to say, many have let their imaginations run wild about the end times instead of adhering strictly to what the Bible tells us. No, mysterious Robert, we are adhering to what the Bible specifically tells us. The Bible specifically tells us how crazy these events are going to be. So don't riddle it back because you know that the landscape of the earth doesn't showcase that. And this is what you're going to hear from these guys. This goes into where they start getting into the metaphorical. This is that partial preterism part they try to slide in, where it all becomes this spiritual metaphor for destruction, when in actuality, biblically, it is talking about actual destruction on the earth. So then he continues, yes, it would have been cataclysmic to live through, but it wasn't necessarily the end of the world. He puts that in quotations. And there must have been survivors, possibly a great many. So this is where he gets to the verse about meltology. And meltology we'll definitely go through here as we're going through everything else, but I'm going to read the verse now. Psalm 97:5, the hills melted like wax at the presence of the Lord and at the presence of the Lord of the whole earth. So what he goes on to get into, and we will talk about this as we go, about some of these locations that supposedly were building structures that were melted during this tribulation, and nobody has an answer for them. So, of course, they have to be during this supposed tribulation that happened around AD 70, which I do agree that the mainstream narrative on some of these locations isn't true. And I'm going to talk about what I think about them, since it is pure conjecture, but we can look at different parts of the Bible and who was involved with these places and say, hey, this is an idea that has nothing to do with the little season. And we're going to talk about Noah's flood and how that's constantly overlooked when it comes to little seasonists and their explanation for everything. Somehow, and I've said this a bunch on the show, somehow the deluge and antediluvian times is completely overlooked by the little season theory. It's literally thrown out the window. So to get into where Robert was just saying that people have let their imaginations run wild instead of adhering strictly to what the Bible tells us, well, let's look at what the Bible tells us about large-scale death in Revelation. So we do know that 1/4 of mankind is killed by the first 4 seals. We also know it's followed by another 1/3 of the remaining population being killed by the 6th trumpet. So that means that over half of the world's population dies from these 2 events alone. So I ended up doing the math. So let's just say we're over 8 billion, like they tell us. We don't know if that's actually true or not, but let's just say, for argument's sake, we're over 8 billion. I just used 8 billion. So we use 1/4, which is 25% of that. So 2 billion people die. So we're down to 6 billion now. And then 1/3 of the 6 billion is another 2 billion, and it leaves us with 4 billion. So a lot of people, but that's half. Also, another thing that's important to mention is that there are tons of cataclysmic events, such as earthquakes, plagues, the entire water system turning to blood. So that number's not even a precise figure. It's probably a whole lot of that too, 4 billion. So yes, Mysterious Robert, yes, it is a cataclysmic event, and we're not letting our imaginations run wild. It's literally what the scripture says. You're just trying to reel it back in because, when we look at the topography of the world, when we look at the old maps, when we look at all of these things, it doesn't add up to this little season eschatology. And you'll see this with these guys. They don't do honest research. They're not actually looking at things thoroughly. They just like to cherry pick something and make it fit within their eschatology. And it's super frustrating for people who research things thoroughly, look at things, and have legitimate questions about why this doesn't work, but yet they are attacked. They're called all kinds of names. And I'm not talking about myself per se. I'm just talking about other people who've had questions. I mean, they're called controlled ops and FBI, for crying out loud, because you don't agree with their eschatology. Guys, we can all agree that the government doesn't have our best interest at heart, but yet have different ideas. However, I think this little season eschatology is super dangerous. We're going to get through this episode, and we're going to show you how far and the lengths they're willing to go to prove this, to the point they are now asking AI to give them the answers to the questions of the North Pole and the camp of the saints. Good old Robert goes on to say, there's a large area of research called meltology, which focuses on evidence of catastrophic heat events that have happened all over the world, with melted cities, rock formations, and mountains that can still be seen today, all displaying signs of being melted by very extreme heat. There's clear evidence of heat being generated that was so intense it could literally melt rock like candle wax, and it's still visible at locations all over the earth. For example, in places like Petra in Jordan and Derinkuyu, which is in the part of modern-day Turkey. Now, I'm not going to get into Petra and Jordan and Derinkuyu. I want to save that for a different episode where we talk about some of the really strange places in the world and what they could actually mean. Because when you look at them, they are strange. There are cities that are essentially built into rock, and they go underground, and they're constructed in a way that you would wonder, how did people in ancient times put those things together? Chisels banging on rock. Well, I've got ideas for that too. And we could literally look to ancient technology again before the flood. It's not a stretch to say that technology, howbeit in a different format than it is now, was vastly different before the flood. And we know, if we look at scripture and we look into the idea of giants and the Nephilim and these fallen angels running rampantly, using DNA manipulation and mating with everything in sight, coupled with the fact that they were teaching mankind all of these scientific, and I put that in air quote, practices. Yeah, it was pretty crazy back then. They probably could have done a whole lot. Again, I don't understand how every single thing somehow ties into the little season, and we just keep forgetting about these other thousands of years that were prior to Christ even coming. But again, everything has to line up with this eschatology, because the more that they can bombard you with the weird, with the wild, then they get you thinking that, it could be true. And I'm here to tell you it's not. And I've never been more sure of anything not being true than I have the little season eschatology in my entire life. I don't know if I've ever just stood up outside of Gnosticism, the occult, and some of these things that I just know that are absolute traps from the devil. I think this is right in the mix of one of the most deceptive things that's being pushed out there by a lot of people who mean well, who I don't think are doing it to be deceptive either. So I'm going to say that again, because I think a lot of the people that are pushing it are really good people, are Christians, and I love a lot of their work outside of this. So again, I don't have anything bad to say about those people. It's just this ideology, because I don't think they're being genuine when they're doing the research, because again, it's flawed through and through. So let's get into some more quote unquote proof verses that good old Robert has to say for us, the mysterious Robert. We'll go to Revelation 8:7. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth. And the third part of the trees was burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up. So what he uses that is a point to show us that because 1/3 of land masses in the world today, which is true, are deserts, and that would line up with the third part of the trees that were burned up. So it's interesting, right? He goes on to say the book of Revelation tells us a third part of the trees of the earth were burned up, which corresponds exactly to 1/3 of the earth being classified as desert today. What a coincidence. Yeah, it is a coincidence if you look at it that way, but we also didn't read every part of that verse, and I'm going to get to that in a second too. Egypt, which was once the fertile breadbasket of the Middle East, is now covered in sand, and the geographical location of modern Israel certainly does not resemble anything like its biblical description of the land of milk and honey or the joy of the whole earth. Instead, they look both like they have suffered severe judgment. Now, I'm not going to say they look like they've suffered severe judgment, and we're going to get into why some of these locations have these deserts. They don't all have deserts because of the same reason. Also, we have maps that are before the time of Christ in BC, and I'm going to talk about one in particular, the Turin papyrus map, and we'll show it up here on the screen. And it's an ancient Egyptian map, generally considered the oldest surviving map of topographical interest from the ancient world. It is drawn on a papyrus reportedly discovered at Deir el-Medina. So Deir el-Medina is an ancient Egyptian workman's village, which was home to the artisans who worked on the tombs in the Valley of the Kings during the 18th to 20th centuries of the New Kingdom of Egypt. And this is in 1550 to 1080 BC. So long before Jesus even got here. And it was discovered in 1824, and it's now preserved in Turin's Museo Egizio. And of course, I'm sure the little seasonists are going to do what I have now coined the Salt Bay technique. And if you ever remember Salt Bay, he used to put salt on the meat and he would cook it up, and all these reels were going viral in 2017. I call it the Salt Bay technique because they just sprinkle a little seasoning on it and say it's a time of deception. So that's exactly what they'll say with this too. Oh, that map was created by the devil, or oh, it was discovered in 1824. Yeah, that's during the time of deception. So of course it was manipulated with no proof, no prior map to say that this is the disruption of the original map. Again, we need proof for you to say something's being changed. There has to be an original document. It goes back to the Mandela effect change in the Bible. I need to see the original to know that it's being changed. But again, it's that ad hoc that they continually use where you say that and say, well, Satan's doing it through CERN and supernatural means, so I can't show you. Well, I'm sorry, I don't believe you then. So that's how it's going to work from here on out when it comes to ethical research. You just can't make up what you want to fit your paradigm. So anyway, back to the map that actually exists, the Turin papyrus map. It shows the Nile River and it shows the desert regions around it. So we know that the Sahara Desert existed long before Jesus came. Now, was there a point in time where that it was a land of milk and honey? It seems like there was biblically, but there's so many different things that could have happened between now and then to cause the change in the environment. I mean, it's mind-blowing to me that we always go to the most crazy, bizarre thing, and we don't even look at the region that it's in, the climate that it's in, and I'm not talking about some fake climate change that's being pushed. I'm talking about actual climate, because there are climate changes throughout history. That's just a known fact. Climate exists, guys. It's not a fake thing. So we know from this map that it existed long before Jesus got here. So again, the only out they're going to have is the classic Little Caesar or Uno card. They got two of them. They can throw out at any time you come with evidence against. They'll say the devil did it or the timeline changed, and you can't fight it. It's an ad hoc hypothesis, like we talked about in the last episode. It's just the thing you can never fight as an honest researcher. They'll just come with an answer that they pull out of thin air to create the narrative that they want. The next part that is brought up with Little Caesars, and this is specifically in this book by Mysterious Robert, he brings up Revelation 6:14 and Revelation 16:20. Now, he tries to tie in that Pangea was during the time of Christ, and the heaven departed as a scroll when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places, Revelation 6:14. And every island fled away, and the mountains were not found, Revelation 16:20. He goes on to say the Appalachian Mountains on the east coast of North America share a unique geological link with the Caledonian mountain range on the west coast of the Scottish Highlands, indicating they were once joined together, forming one unified mountain range. Even the controlled scientific world tells us that at one time the Earth was a single supercontinent called Pangea that subsequently broke apart. But as per usual, their Big Bang evolution false timeline narrative, they estimate it happened hundreds of billions of years ago, when in reality it was likely in our very recent past, like after Jesus returned and judgment was poured out, which fits perfectly with the biblical timeline. Absolutely, it does not. So here's what I want to say. No, I don't think it happened hundreds of billions of years ago at all. I think it happened during the flood, and we can prove this biblically, how the Bible says that. Number one, it says every island fled away and the mountains were not found. Are there any mountains found right now? I can go out my window, drive down the road, and find a mountain. We can all find a mountain somewhere, guys. We can find mountains. Islands moved out of their places. What does that mean? Are we talking about continents? Are we talking about actual islands being moved around? Again, it doesn't prove your narrative. It also says islands. Every island, plural, fled away. So if it was Pangea, it would be one island. It's not multiple islands moving around. Again, I just don't think people are actually reading. And for people that don't know what Pangea is, it was a supercontinent that existed during the late Paleozoic and early Mesozoic areas. It assembled from the earlier continental units of Gondwana, Euramerica, and Siberia during the Carboniferous period, approximately 335 million years ago. It began to break apart about 200 million years ago at the end of the Triassic and beginning of the Jurassic, which all of that I don't adhere to. Just giving you the mainstream jargon for what they say Pangea is. So let's get into what I think Pangea is. So a lot of creationists, like myself, believe that Pangea was before the deluge, before the flood. Where do we get this idea from? So Genesis 1:9-10. Then God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together in one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dried land earth. The gathering together of the waters he called seas. So it does talk more about the waters being gathered together, but if the waters are being gathered together in one place, would it make sense that the land was also gathered together in one place? This is antediluvian times. This is at the creation of the world before Adam. It's as simple as that. We just forget about these several thousand of years before the deluge. But that's convenient because they need all of this to work. So Genesis 7:11. This gets to Noah now. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows in heaven were open. So it talks about all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and we know that water came from above and below. So that makes a lot of sense. If water is splitting the land coming from below, the land itself is going to be moved around. Also, the entire world is covered in water, on top of the fact that water is splitting the land apart. So by the time that the deluge is over and Noah comes out on dry land, the entire makeup of the world has changed. That's a pretty good example for what happened to Pangea, not this precursor to the millennial kingdom that Jesus supposedly already ruled on earth for 1,000 years. It's just a little bit of simple research that I think gets left out of this, because if you're just constantly trying to prove this thing, you're going to negate all the other evidences out there. So we're also going to talk briefly about the AD 536 event. And if you have never heard about the AD 536 event, a very unusual event. It was supposedly, and this is by mainstream, and again, I've always got some red flags up when it comes to certain things that they can't quite explain, but they try to throw whatever they can at the wall to make it stick. So obviously, little seasonists look at this particular time. It kind of falls in a range that they can play with 700 to 1,000 years being missing, supposedly. So again, it doesn't even line up correctly, even by their math, but it's enough to where they can be very ambiguous about it. But we don't really know, give or take 300 to 400 years. We don't know. They've been lying to us forever. So supposedly it was a volcanic winter in 536, and it was among the most severe episodes of climactic cooling in the Northern Hemisphere in the last 2,000 years. And the volcanic winter was caused by at least 3 simultaneous eruptions of uncertain origin, with several possible locations proposed in various continents. So the documentary evidence was Procopius, and he recorded this in AD 536, and he was a Roman historian. And he reported on the wars with the Vandals during that time. And he said, during this year, a most dread portent took place, for the sun gave forth its light without brightness and seemed exceedingly like the sun in eclipse, for the beams it shed were not clear. So according to a lot of historians, and I'm going to talk about specifically how this isn't just a European written thing, to go back to Flamenco and Heinsohn trying to make it out that the Dark Ages were fake, weren't real, and nobody else in the world was writing about anything. Well, we've got evidence that there were other parts of the world that were also writing about this event. So specifically, this event was like an eclipse for an entire year. And it caused mass famine. It caused tons of upheaval worldwide. It changed the climate for a year. And I'm going to say this. Do we know biblically of plenty of shakeups that happened throughout the Bible? Yeah, we know about Joseph, who ended up being second under Pharaoh, and he told Pharaoh about a great famine that will last 7 years. We know of tons of catastrophic events throughout the Bible. You think they just stopped when the Bible was written? Oh, there's no more catastrophic events, guys. Nothing else we can't possibly imagine. No, that would be silly, and it would be ridiculous of us. As a matter of fact, just in the past 100, 200 years, we've seen some crazy stuff happen in the world with hurricanes, with earthquakes, so many things that have escalated in just a year's time sometimes. So again, is it a weird occurrence? Yeah, and I'm even going to read what Cassidorius, who was a Roman statesman, and he wrote this in 538, what he said when he wrote to one of his subordinates about this event. He said the sun's rays were weak and they appeared a bluish color. At noon, no shadows from people were visible on the ground. The heat from the sun was feeble. The moon, even when full, was empty of splendor. A winter without storms, a spring without mildness, a summer without heat, prolonged frost, and unseasonable drought. So that would lend to this idea of a mini ice age that happened during that time. It also lends into a lot of the Viking tales that were told during that specific time as well. The sky is described as blended with alien elements like cloudy weather, and it prolonged. It was stretched like a hide across the sky and prevented the true colors of the sun and moon from being seen, along with the sun's warmth. Frost during harvest made apples harden and grapes sour. And it goes on and on and on. All of this really wild stuff that was happening during that time. So was this just relegated to the Dark Ages of Europe that were hiding it from all of us? No, it actually wasn't. So we can actually look to China, which, interestingly enough, Heinsohn and Flamenco really have a tough time trying to rope into all this. And you can tell that they struggle with it because it's a completely different side of the world. And they have, I'm talking extensive records during these times that they say that didn't exist. As a matter of fact, their records go back the last 2,000 years with a strong tradition of official and dynastic archives dating back to at least the Han Dynasty, which began 2,000 years ago. The records are found in a variety of sources, including official dynastic histories, official government documents, and archaeological finds like bamboo slips. They cover administrative, economic, and social information. So all this has been forged. All of it's been faked by the devil. Just, sprinkle some little seasoning on it and say it's a time of deception. Just salt bay it. It's really, you got to really stretch it out there to really say that all of these Chinese documents for 2,000 years were forged and fake. As a matter of fact, the scribes kept meticulous records of government and society. For example, the Book of Han, which was completed around 111 AD, contained detailed information on topics like the salaries of the officials that were working during the time. In 2024, hundreds of official government records from the Han dynasties were found in a well in Changsha. These bamboo slips contain information on taxes, household registrations, and other administrative details. So all of this information, all the way back 2,000 years ago, is meticulously recorded by the Chinese and all of these dynasties in the Chinese, which again, conveniently gets left out with the little season eschatology, and conveniently gets left out of new chronology and all the chronology criticisms. Again, they try to rope some of this in there the best they can, but it just falls flat on its face. And a lot of the Indian documents that were going on in the Islamic countries are also negated out of this whole thing, which I talked about in the last episode. There's a lot going on in the world, not just in Europe, guys, but yet they're so consumed with looking at Europe that they don't look at anything going on in the rest of the world. Nothing. So what did the Chinese historical records have to say about this event in 536 AD? And we have to bring up 536 because this is what the little seasonists say was, guess what? The tribulation time. This is the cover-up for the tribulation, which, by the way, the event in AD 536 that's been documented by sources out the yin-yang, pun intended, don't describe anything remotely to the seals, the trumpets, or the bowls that are described in Revelation. Not even close. Not even close. Where do the Chinese talk about it? In the Nanxi, the history of the southern dynasties describes a yellow ash-like substance from the sky that fell like snow in 536 and 537. It also noted unseasonable snow and frost in the summer of 537 that destroyed all the crops. The Beishi, Chronicle of the Northern Dynasties, reports a severe drought in 535, followed by hail and a great famine in 536. It describes widespread cannibalism and a death toll as high as 70 to 80% in the Guangdong region during that time as well. In the Zhuzu Tongjian, this comprehensive history mentions a great cold and widespread famine in 536 with records also of cannibalism. So it was a crazy event that happened during that period of time. But again, nothing compared to what Revelation talks about. Oh, but it's the cover-up. They're going to mild it down. But yet, Mysterious Robert's already milding it down because he has to prove that it's not as crazy as the Bible says that it is because it's got to fit his paradigm. And just a little side note when it comes to the chronology criticisms and new chronology, one of the things that I meant to mention in the last episode was that a lot of these new chronology guys that come out, they were in the German, Russian areas. And you got to understand that when people were really buying into these new chronologies back in the 90s, the world that they lived in, everything they learned was taught in school and showed on television through the lens of propaganda and lies. So late night Soviet TV, they would have these clairvoyants and telepaths on during prime time. They'd be healing the viewers through the television. And when people started realizing that everything they'd been taught was a lie because it was all propaganda, they were ready to suck in whatever was anti-mainstream. And this is the point I'm making to rope it all the way back into the Cass Sunstein effect, which I've been talking about since the first episode of this podcast. This is how these psyops work. When people are at their most vulnerable and they know they've been lied to by a lot of things in the mainstream, that's when the harvest bed is ripe for conspiracies to come in and take hold of their minds and people to believe them outright, when some of those theories themselves could be absolute lies. Similar to what Fomenko and Heinsohn were doing, they came along at the right time when people were ready to hear that the government was lying to them, and people just bought into it without a whole lot of research from guys who weren't even anything in the fields that they were talking about. Not to say, again, that these guys weren't smart, but they weren't experts in the fields that they used to promote their new chronologies. And I think that's by design. I think these guys were absolute psyops. And again, go back to last episode and see the breadcrumb trail to their mentors, who their mentors were as well. And again, just boil it down to what they think about Jesus. If they think that Jesus is actually the Son of God, a divine entity, one with God, they don't. And you'll find that out thoroughly when you actually read the books and listen to what they've actually had to say about this. So we want to talk a little bit more about the deserts and how these deserts could have been formated due to climate change over a long period of time. And we're not talking, again, about climate change in the sense of what is being espoused in the mainstream. But I do find it interesting, a lot of the terminologies that these guys use negate the real climate changes that we've had throughout the world over time. We've had climate swings, and I tend to like to use that better because I don't think we're moving to some like massive change like they're trying to sell us. But I do think that we've had climate swings through thousands of years. We know that. It's been documented. We just talked about the event. We just talked about the event in AD 536. So that would be considered some sort of odd climate swing. And maybe there was more to it than we know. But again, we don't have all the facts there. And I'm not going to sit there and just put it on the little season that somehow that was the tribulation, when that makes absolutely no sense either. So let's look at the desert regions. So we've got different types of deserts, guys. We've got hot deserts. These are your stereotypical ones, like the Sahara. They're known for extreme temperatures, limited rainfall, and sandy terrain. So you might say, these are the ones that got hit by whatever judgment that came, right? So we've got cold deserts. These are found in higher latitudes, and these deserts experience cold winters and sometimes very little precipitation, often falling as snow. The Gobi Desert and parts of the Antarctica are examples. So that's also considered a desert, guys. Not all deserts are hot. So again, desert doesn't constitute as being a desert that was created from some hot judgment from above. Not in the slightest. We've got coastal deserts. Those are found along coastlines, and those deserts are influenced by cold ocean currents with limited rainfall. They also create unique ecosystems. The Atacama Desert is a big example of that. So again, these are influenced by a different type of climate. We've got polar deserts. These are found in the Arctic and Antarctic regions and receive little precipitation, and most of the moisture is locked up in ice and snow. So again, a different climate that causes this type of desert. So when you hear little seasonists say that 1/3 of the deserts in the world, that proves the verse where 1/3 of the trees were burnt up. No, because all these deserts aren't the same. So what deserts you might be talking about are the hot deserts, but that's a small percentage of the 1/3, and it wouldn't fall into the same amount. Also, in Revelation 8:7, let's talk about this verse again. It's the part that's conveniently missed. And the first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth, and the third part of the trees was burned up, and all, what? Green grass was burned up. All green grass. That would have been the entire world. That wouldn't have been the 1/3. The 1/3 was just the trees. We're talking about all grass was burned up. So that would have been everything you walked on would have been burnt up. Burnt up. And you say, well, what about the trees? Why would there still have been trees? Well, there's a lot of trees without grass around them. And just because some extreme heat hits the trees doesn't mean they're all burnt up. This is a literal burning up of the trees. So 1/3 of the trees are burnt up, which means 3/4 of the trees are not, but all green grass is burnt up. It's the other piece they leave out. So that would be indicative of the entire world being a desert at that point. Doesn't fall within the narrative of the 1/3 of the deserts in the world, but again, conveniently left out. Also, we can look to Matthew 24:21, and Matthew 24:21 says, "For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not seen since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be." It would be absolutely ridiculous. So again, it doesn't fall within Mysterious Robert's narrative of it not being that big a deal. It wouldn't have been as bad as people make it out to be. I thought little seasons were adherents of the scripture. Clearly not, because it says, such as was not seen the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor shall ever be. Worst ever, ever. So that doesn't play into the event of AD 536 in the slightest. It doesn't play into anything. Meltology, none of it. None of it adds up. It just takes a little bit of research, guys, to find the holes, like I've said, like SpongeBob, all through this. All right, so we're going to have to jump into Tartaria here. It's very important to what they have to say. And honestly, what's interesting is the Tartaria guys, which I honestly believe Tartaria was on life support a few years ago, and it had so many holes poked through it. I mean, there are some massive channels on YouTube, Rumble, that are created solely to debunk Tartaria, and they've gone through an immense amount of work, and it's really good research too. It's not speculation. It's looking at documents and facts and historical evidence. And it was on life support until the little season came along, and the little season revived it from its deathbed and brought it new life. So now you're seeing a lot of people who believe in Tartaria are now becoming little seasonists. Some of them aren't really caring so much about Christianity. They just know it's a hot thing that will get them views and get them attention, saddling up to the narrative that Jesus already had a kingdom here, and this is what Tartaria actually was. Let's get into it. And I know some people might not know what Tartaria is. We'll get into a brief history again, guys. This is not an episode about Tartaria and debunking Tartaria. This is just its correlation between it and the little season, and how it would be very difficult for it to match up to what they say the little season is now, and what they also say the millennial kingdom was before. So Tartaria, or Tartary, was historically a region in North Central Asia. However, in the last decade, it turned into this wild theory and this emergence that it was not just a geographical location, which is on maps, and I've talked about that before, but it was supposedly a worldwide empire with evidence of its influence all over Europe, the Americas, Asia. It's supposedly like our best kept secret that was around as soon as 150 to 300 years ago, which fits nicely within that little season timeline they try to create. But what's funny is when you listen to proponents of Tartaria, they don't even agree. They've even said they don't know if it was 150 years ago or if it was 1,000 years ago when it ended. There is so much disparity even within the Tartarian communities. So what the little season theory did was it came along, it gave it new life, plus it gave it a structure to where now they're all moving to adhere to the new chronology of the little season eschatology. So all of these researchers and theorists, they are pushing what this Tartarian empire was like, how it fell, why its history was supposedly erased from the collective memory. And you'll see a lot of different ideas about who they think that the Tartarians were. Most of them say that they were very benevolent, but that they were giants and they were huge. Well, that's weird, because we know, generally speaking, when we're looking at large groups of giants, they're typically not good. And you know my theory on good Nephilim. If you haven't heard it yet, you can go listen to it. But this was a very small percentage of Nephilim and giants that I believe turned away from their evil ways and joined up with Yahweh and joined the camp of Christ. So that's a whole different argument for a different day. But we're talking about a massive empire full of giants. This is what people who believe in this theory of Tartary or Tartaria, and we're going to get how they nicely wrote that into the little season here in a minute. So what are the innovations and what are the knowledges that these Tartarians supposedly have? Well, free energy is one of them. And this technology of free energy, they tie it into Nikola Tesla and what Tesla talks about in some of his patents. They say he got his patents from the Tartarians. They tie this into cathedrals around the world, and they say that they had these devices on top of them that could harness this etheric energy from the sky above, and it was free energy for all around the world. And somehow, through a mud flood and other catastrophic events, that these mythical giant people who had this insane technology couldn't stop the mud that wasn't even that big of a deal because they say it covered the whole earth. Well, that's interesting too, because in Genesis, God tells Noah that he'll never destroy the earth by water again. Well, mud is water, and that counts. So that is completely untrue. So you're actually going against the Bible if you believe in a mud flood covering the earth. Now, I know there's probably going to be some people out there right now saying, oh, it didn't cover the whole earth, just the spots that they were trying to attack the elites. So these peon elites who are humans outsmarted these uber intelligent giant people. It doesn't make sense. And that's why when you slide in the little season eschatology, they make it make sense because guess what? Jesus and the giant saints left on purpose because Satan had to be loose to deceive us. And that's why the Tartarian people love it because they said, oh, we finally made it make sense. We can shoot our missiles back at you now. But again, it's all just conjecture, all just confirmation bias. So they talk about vibrational healing. They talk about when you walk in these cathedrals, you'd be healed by the sound. And I'm not saying there aren't things that make sense when we talk about vibrations. And I've talked about vibrations a lot on this show. And I'm not talking about the new age way of talking about vibrations. However, they are also tapping into what is vibrational healing. They're just using it in a nefarious aspect. But to say that vibrational healing doesn't exist, I think it's ridiculous. But again, this ties into this greater narrative that all of these buildings you could just walk into and be healed. And they tie it into Jesus and the saints created these buildings for people to be healed instantly, which we have nothing biblical to show us that that's even a possibility at all. And at that point of these look like antennas that are on top of some of these cathedrals and all that, man, some of these videos rolling around of, we saw one where it worked and it was sparking up. And I mean, in the age of AI and the age of fabrication and even some of these videos that were put out even before AI became really a thing. I mean, people were fabricating videos for a long time. And I've been a proponent of maybe when it comes to videos. Just like I say, every UFO video isn't fake. A lot of them are. Same with Tartaria. A lot of stuff is fake. And maybe some of this stuff that's out there could be real, but I don't think it ties into this mythical global civilization that was ruling us with a benevolent hand, which now has been bogarted into Jesus and the saints that were doing it during this 1,000 years. Of course, they talk about spiritual enlightenment and how that was a big thing during this time. Obviously, that would tie directly into Jesus and the saints being here and ruling. And to get to another interesting thing that they believe. So because a lot of these cathedrals would have these giant doors that were, 15 feet tall, 20 feet tall in some cases, it can't be that architects wanted to create grand entrances for, aesthetics and symbolic purposes. No. It has to be because giants had to walk through the doors. And that's how it started with the whole Tartarian. Well, this got slid into the little season eschatology because they say that the saints, when they were resurrected, they became anywhere from 9 to 12 feet tall. Nothing biblical that supports this at all. But what they did was they attached themselves to the Tartarian ideas that were already out there. And they looked at iconography of these saints that are painted where they look larger than the people around them and they have halos on their heads. So they say, oh, the saints, they were bigger and they had halos on their heads. It can't be just that it was iconography, or it couldn't be that they were showcasing, I don't know, giants from the past in some places, right? But just say it's newer iconography. A lot of those people would draw these saints as being bigger than life. That's more than likely what was going on there. But the halo thing really got me because they're really adamant that the saints have halos. You can see them in the iconography. They're giants, and they came at their light beams, and they have halos on their heads, and they ruled with Jesus for 1,000 years, then disappeared to the North Pole. Well, what's a halo? Is a halo biblical? Is it scriptural? Is it Christian? Let's take a look at that, because I know the answer to that, and that really threw me for a loop when they kept saying that these saints would have halos on their head. Well, the Greek word for halo is halos, Halos, and it originally meant a threshing floor, which a threshing floor, for people who don't know, it's like a flat outdoor area, and it's circular, and it's used to separate grain from its stalks and husks. So you'll see it in a circular fashion. So that's where they get the word halos from, or it also means disc. And it also came to mean the circle of light around the sun or moon. But this also moves into sun worship, and it ties into Helios, Helios, who was a god of ancient Greek religion and mythology who personifies what? The sun. So this ties into any of these sun gods throughout history. And he's often given the epithets of Hyperion, the one above, and Phaethon, the shining. And we know that the shining typically ties into what? These Elohim, these fallen angels. We know throughout history they're called the shining. So Helios would, in my opinion, be one of these gods, one of these Elohim. And he's depicted in art with a radiant crown, and he's driving a horse-drawn chariot through the sky, sometimes pictured as a disc. That also ties into a lot of ufology and the fact that the modern day, quote unquote, aliens are tied into these fallen angels and these Elohim. And a lot of the descriptions of flying saucers now were also seen in a time before. And it was drawn in iconography in these ways and connected to the gods. And Helios figures prominently in several works of Greek mythology, poetry, and literature, in which he is often described as the son of the what? Titans, giants, Hyperion and Thea, and brother of the goddess Selene, the moon, and Eos, the dawn. Helios' most notable role in Greek mythology is the story of his mortal son, Phaethon, which that's a very interesting tale as well. And maybe I'll get into that at one point. But due to his position as the sun, he was believed to be an all-seeing witness, all-seeing eye, and thus was often invoked in oaths. He also played a significant part in ancient magic and spells. So in art, halos originally appeared as discs of gold sketched above the head of a figure. This depicted a sphere of light radiating from the head of the person, suggesting that the subject was in a mystical state or sometimes just very smart, depending on what they were drawing. Because of its shape and color, the halo was also associated with the sun and resurrection, so it was tied into Helios. By the 4th century, the halo had become widely used in standard Christian art. This was a pagan symbol. This was never a Christian symbol. Most commonly, Jesus and the Virgin Mary are shown with halos along with the angels. And this came later in the 4th century when halos started being drawn over saints, Jesus, Virgin Mary. It's never found in the Bible. The halo is both pagan and non-Christian in its origin. It was many centuries before Christ where there were natives decorated their heads with crown of feathers to represent the relationship with the sun god. So that was even further back when we're looking at some of these other religions that were long before Christ. The way that they would signify it would be these crown of feathers, which was symbolic of what was later known with the Greeks as the halos, which is the word that the word halo is derived from. So you're going to tell me as a little seasonist that a pagan symbol that is purely pagan in origin is tied to the saints who are 12 feet tall light beings in the North Pole, and it's a Christian thing. Absolutely not. And you're not going to sprinkle some little seasoning on it and say it's a time of deception. Oh, they changed that in the writings. It was always a good thing, and the devil had to invert it. It is an inversion, but it's the other way around, where nefarious people in the church were taking it on board. And then I do think that people who weren't nefarious at all just used it as iconography as we went throughout the centuries. Like, I'm not going to sit here and tell you you're going to hell, you draw a halo on something, and by any stretch. Just know where it came from. So are you telling me that when Jesus returns in AD 70, he sets up his 1,000-year kingdom and resurrects the saints to rule with him, that he puts a pagan symbol on their heads? Doesn't make any sense. But again, unless you know the origins of these symbols and know where things are coming from, you just get roped into the narrative and you say, oh, it sounds great. Yeah, halos, woohoo, in the North Pole. Let's get back to Tartaria. So we know that Tartaria was at some point a utopian society. It was a paradise, peace, harmony. Everyone wants now, right? And Tartaria solved all the problems: poverty, disease, anything you could think of. Death, essentially, because your timeline would stretch out so you wouldn't die as soon. All these different things. So it sounds great when you want to slide in the little season with it. Yeah, Jesus was here. He created utopia. So we talked about the fall of Tartaria, how that's super convoluted, and that this mud flood, which covered the whole earth, again, is not biblical at all. And it was done by a new world order of elite powers that somehow figured out how to take out these super smart 12-foot giants, or in the case of Little Season, they just left us to it, left us to our own demise. Us poor people who had no chance at all to be deceived, which isn't biblical again at all. And I've already gone through all that. So they do look at a lot of these buildings that are dug up, and sometimes they'll go down as far as 15, 20 feet. And these buildings go down into the ground. And some of that is interesting. Now, some of it is pretty explainable in the sense that a lot of these buildings were built on top of buildings. Some of it is weird. And guess what? There were mud floods, guys. It didn't cover the whole earth, but there's been mud floods throughout history. And there's also erosion, all these other things that are way more practical. But then they get into the World's Fairs that were in the 19th and 20th centuries. And those are super central to the Tartarian conspiracy theory, because according to the whole Tartarian movement, these fairs were built around existing Tartarian buildings, and the organizers falsely claimed they were cheaply made temporary structures intended to be demolished afterward. The perfect cover for hiding the evidence of the empire. So if you're a Tartarian person, you tricked the giants, the elites did, and they had to get rid of all of these magical buildings. And I say magical because they could heal you, and you could essentially connect to God in these buildings. So they had to get rid of them. So what they did was they built these other buildings next to them and had these world fairs there, and they demolished all the buildings at once when they moved the World's Fairs. Now, it is interesting that the World's Fairs built these buildings to only rip them up, and then some of the buildings they didn't rip up, and then they repurposed as government buildings. For sure. I mean, there are some very interesting aspects of Tartaria that I don't think lend into some mystical 1,000-year reign of Jesus or some mystical kingdom that ruled the world. But I do think there are things that probably point to things that are biblical, that maybe one day I decide to go down that road. Again, Tartaria is not something I'm super interested in, but if I find an angle that I find interesting and it connects to something along biblical lines that makes sense to me, that aren't convoluted with a bunch of confirmation bias, then maybe I'll touch it one day. Very similar to, I know I'm going to touch Petra and Darren Kuyu and some couple other things I may talk about today too. I may touch in a different episode where we look at it in a different light. So the buildings, obviously, that made it after the demolition, they just repurposed and they removed the free energy, or they actually say they collected it and, and hid it. Oh boy, I tell you what, it's a good one. So how does Tartaria fit within the Little Season eschatology? So we've got the timeline. similar-ish enough to where they can connect them. So Tartarian researchers date the empire around 1,000 years ago, and that also aligns with Christ's 1,000-year reign. Also, the society that was utopian, we know that both are supposedly utopian. We know that the 1,000-year reign would be in the Bible, but according to the people who look at Tartaria, they would say that, oh, that's also utopian. Talk about free energy, which we already talked about. That's just on both fronts a speculation. Now, we could speculate during Christ's reign, there'll probably be some sort of free energy, right? We don't know anything biblically about that, but if we're talking about a utopian society, more than likely, and obviously it lines up with the Tartarian ideas that it was utopian. We talked about vibrational healing already and walking into these buildings that could heal your body, and that would lend into Christ's kingdom as well. It all sounds good, right? It's sexy. I've said this theory is super sexy. And it gets into the architecture of the time and the buildings with domes, and they say they reflect Christ's glory, and that's why they were trying to tear them down. But of course, the Tartarian people, before the little season eschatology came along, just believed that these represented these giant people who were benevolent, trying to help us. And that's why the big old bad elitists had to tear them down, which I totally believe in the big old bad elitists. I just don't think that any of this holds much weight. So let's get into the survivors. Now, we know, according to little season eschatology, we are in a 250 to 300 year little season reign. And we talked about they think that we're the rest of the dead, which I thoroughly went through already in the episode of the Mandela Effect and the rest of the dead. So go back and listen to that, and I will break down through hermeneutics who the rest of the dead actually are. They believe that we are the descendants of the rest of the dead. And this ties into Tartaria because we had to find out what happened to the millions or billions of people who would have witnessed Christ's kingdom. We've got collective memory, which I'm going to get into too, that people would have had. They would have remembered this time. Even if we're talking about a few hundred years ago, it would have been passed down through the generations. Well, they have to have an answer for that. But let's look at Revelation 28. And shall go out to deceive the nations, talking about Satan when he's loosed, which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. Sand of the sea. That is a lot of people, y'all. A lot. And to be able to do what little season theorists said happened, also tying this into Tartaria, to all these people that remember Jesus ruling, the people that didn't get away, because they've got a new one too, where they say that they've got evidence that people were moving north to follow Jesus and the saints further up north so they could be protected from Satan. Isn't that just an absolutely awful God? Rule for 1,000 years and then just bounce on you and let you fend for yourself. Let you fend for yourself. Let that make sense. The people who had been worshiping him the whole time were left to fend for themselves. And gets into this part. Little seasons think that those who remember Jesus were institutionalized in insane asylums that proliferated during the 1800s. So obviously, throw them in insane asylums because they're talking crazy stuff about Jesus ruling. But again, how many insane asylums would have to exist for the sands of the sea amount of people to throw in there? First off, who's throwing them in there? Because the people throwing them in there would know about Jesus' millennial kingdom. Think about it. What, those evil people just said, we'll just act like we don't know. We'll keep it to ourselves. Be like that M. Night Shyamalan movie, The Village, where they keep the secret from all the people that are living there. Yeah, that's easy to do when you got a society of 30 to 50 people. We're talking about billions. Yeah, even if you had a contingent of evil people who were locking up the good people, they would still know. Oh, I'm sure that Little Seasons will create an ad hoc for that too and say that, well, they went through an MK Ultra brainwashing session on their own volition so they could forget. Hey, I'm throwing you a bone here. I'm giving you one, guys. Run with it. Run with it. Sprinkle some little seasoning on it. Run with it. Think about this. The children of those people that got captured, poor souls that got captured who believed in Jesus, who were here with him, he just up and bounced on them, him and the saints. Tell me how that's a good God. It's not. It's not biblical. in the slightest, So the children, so supposedly they were all gathered up, all these children, and they were dispersed via the orphan trains. They were like basically boxcars full of children, and they were given away or sold to attendees at the world fairs. And they ensured that the next generation would have no knowledge of Christ's reign. So none of these kids would remember either magically, right? They all went through MK Ultra programming, millions of children, and it would have to be millions of children. But the best part is we know how many children were dispersed during orphan trains during a 75-year period. And it's wild to even think that people could actually buy into that. And we're going to get into how many orphans were dispersed during this time period here in a second, but I want to also go through some of the more practical applications to some of these things in Tartaria. So when it comes to buildings and grand structures, there's a reason why we don't build that way now. Not because we can't. We have the knowledge to do it. We were doing it. A lot of it is just very simple. It's economics, guys. You've got material cost and labor. I came from the world of building. I sold houses for a long time. I worked with project managers. I worked with land developers. I worked with all those people. And when the industrial age came along, it was more about cost efficiency and how fast that you can build something and get it up. It's not about spending 10 to 15 to 20 years building an elite structure anymore. Nobody does that anymore. They did in the past because people back then had time to do that because they didn't have all of these other things that they were involved with. Times changed. Modernization happened. It's very simple. We can look at population growth. We know that in the age of people being able to travel more easily via airplane, via larger ships, all of these things got people to other places around the world. And guess what people did? They made it. They had more children. That's why Bill Gates is always screaming about overpopulation, even though I know that we've got plenty of land. As a matter of fact, we're not overpopulated. That's just a lie from the WEF and all those guys. We've grown immensely just in the last 200 years. So there are very simple reasons for why we don't build structures the same way we used to. Now, are there some structures that are just absolutely in the realm of not being able to explain around the world? Yeah. And I think that lends to either ancient technology, and we could tie this into the Nephilim, fallen angels. We could talk about godly technology of the ancient world. And I've talked about that plenty of times on the show. So I'm not saying that I believe the mainstream narrative on a lot of these things. I'm just saying it's not this, that this has got too many flaws in it. We can talk about healing technology. It's just made up. Nobody's got any proof that anybody could actually walk into a building and be healed. None. There's nothing on video. There's no one coming out saying they were. None of that. It's literally just something that was made up. It was just an ad hoc. Oh, I know they were in there getting healed. Well, how do you know? Because they had to be. Because they were so much smarter than us back then. And to the little seasonist point, of course, Jesus, which I don't disagree that when he does rule for 1,000 years, that it's going to be vastly different how all of those things work. I want to talk about a friend of mine, Ed Mabry, and he's wrote a fantastic book you guys should go pick up called The Little Season of Satan, Hidden History or Hidden Agenda. And I will give you guys the link at the end of this episode, plus Tracy Liebens' book too. And again, I always push people to have ethical research. I'm not telling you don't go read the Little Season books too that promote it. Do it. But also read books that counter it, because that's how you come to your actual conclusion. And I believe that Ed Mabry and Tracy Liebens have written 2 books that are phenomenal in countering it. So he brings up in his book the social memory problem. And I just wanted to point to his book on this because I thought what he said here was pretty fascinating, because he brought up a really good example in the book about how that if Jesus' empire occurred only 15 to 200 years ago, it would fall well within what is called social memory. So it's basically a reliable oral history that persists for approximately 2 generations, or about 150 years. So it's not some concept in academia that's obscure. It's how families pass down stories and experiences through the generations. And we know this all the way back to the early Israelites. A lot of the things that were passed down were through oral tradition. It wasn't written down early on. Many cultures had that, and that would be through social memory. So He gives an example in the book. He said, the defining event of my generation was likely 9/11, the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001. He said, I have a vivid firsthand memory of this event, which I can relate to my children. My children can tell their children, and potentially I could tell my grandchildren directly. This creates a chain of reliable memory spanning several generations. If someone tried to distort this history, claiming, for instance, that Argentine terrorists drove a bus of explosives into the Empire State Building, I could correct this misinformation based on my eyewitness experience. Sorry, young'uns, but that's not what happened. I watched it unfold on television that morning. My grandchildren, knowing and trusting me, would believe my account over revisionist history. That's how social memory works. It's remarkably resistant to wholesale revision. And then he goes on to talk about his grandfather who was in World War II and then watching Saving Private Ryan together, and how that it had a ton of historical inaccuracies. And he basically told him what was actually going on during that time because he was a part of it. So this is the part little Caesarists just can't get around. They try to with the insane asylum and orphan train stuff, which I'm going to get into the problems there here in a second, but social memory. No one remembers this. How do we not remember it? Nobody in the past 100, 150 years, not one soul remembers anything to do with Jesus ruling, which was relatively close to our timeline now. Again, logic and reasoning have to go completely out the window to believe this little season theory. So let's get into the insane asylums and the orphan train issues. These nefarious people were to round up all of Christ's kingdom that was left. The people that Jesus and his saints just left here to fend for themselves, the people that have been worshiping him this whole time, he just left them to fend for themselves because the devil's out running rampant. Who built the facilities? Because if most of the people knew about Jesus and they had to be rounded up because they knew about him, who was rounding them up? Was it demonic entities? Well, in that case, if the demonic entities are rounding them up, who's left here to rule over? Oh, but there were some bad people that turned and yeah, but they still knew about it. None of them talked about it amongst themselves about living under this rule of Christ. Doesn't make any sense. Where are the records from these asylums? There's no documentation of any of the patients during that time talking about Christ's kingdom. None of them. No crazy loon that was talking about, I don't know, animals eating grass and being able to walk into a building and getting healed instantly. No loons? What about the orphan trains and all of these orphans that would have had to have been in the millions that were brought in to these world fairs? Why would every single one of the World's Fair attendees, who had to be evil, by the way, but also knew about Jesus's rule, why would they want these children? Did demonic entities push them to get them? And how many asylums would have to be created for the sands of the sea amount of people that, again, Jesus and his saints just left to fend for themselves after they had been faithfully worshiping him for a long time? Again, none of it adds up. But what we do know is that, yeah, during the 18th and 19th century, there were more asylums built during that time because there was a big rise in fields of psychology and psychiatry. And we know this because I did an entire episode on the psychology of the werewolf, and we talked about Sabine Baring Gould's book that he wrote in 1865 called The Book of Werewolves. And he did it from a psychological angle, and he talked about people going crazy in the book. This was during a period of time where people were actually starting to look at mental health and mental issues that people were having. For good and bad, by the way. Good and bad. There was a lot of bad that came out of that too. There's an answer for that. And we know for 75 years when these programs were in place for the orphan trains, the kids, the number was 200,000 guys. 200,000. It wasn't millions and billions of kids, which it would have had to have been at least a few million, at the least. No records of this. It doesn't exist. This is where we're getting into the wild stuff. I told you, these last few episodes get wild because you have to believe in the wildest stuff for this to be possible. Here's another one for you. Where is the evidence of this biblical time? Satan covered it up. Boom, uno. How did he cover it up? Because we know that Egyptian hieroglyphics exist in all Egyptian structures. We know that the Hanging Gardens belong to Babylon, plus many other Babylonian artifacts. We have plenty of Greek carvings, Roman buildings, all of these things. we've seen for thousands of years. We have Sumerian culture as well. And somehow magically, Satan could cover up every single vestige of Christ's kingdom for 1,000 years. And nobody remembers it. Not one of these buildings that they say was Tartarian buildings that were now relegated to Christ buildings have anything in them that remotely looks like something from that time period. And I'm just going to read a little excerpt out of Ed Mabry's book here because I about fell out laughing, but he's so right. He said, shouldn't there be carvings or paintings showing biblical figures reunited during the millennium? Abraham and Moses fishing in the Mediterranean, lions eating straw like oxen, wolves laying down with lambs, records of Christ's judgment and reign. Think about that. So if he was reigning for 1,000 years, there would be iconography that would show what he was doing during that time. Nations celebrating Jewish feast, which we already talked about Irenaeus talking about when the Antichrist walks up in the temple during the tribulation. Any depiction of what scripture says would happen during the millennium, nothing at all. And when you ask little seasonists, you know what they say? It was painted over with not a lick or shred of evidence. Did you see when you walked in one of these buildings, paint chipping, and you could see a face behind it and say, what is that? Oh man, I saw something. Not a shred of evidence. Literally zero. It's ad hoc hypothesis over and over and over again. I need something to be able to see so then I can say, okay, that right there lends me to think that something's being covered up. There is literally nothing. And you're not going to tell me that Satan is this all-powerful guy who's covered it all up. It's ludicrous. And not only that, and I talked about this in length in episode 1, but we know that Christ's kingdom, the Hebrew word olam, is everlasting. Daniel 2:44 and 7:14. Without end. It doesn't mean that it's going to last for 1,000 years and then Jesus and the saints roll out and leave everybody to fend for themselves. Specifically, the people that were following him. Make it make sense. It doesn't. Let's get into the North Pole, guys. Why people think that why Jesus and the saints are hiding out in the North Pole. So let's get back to good old Robert's book, the pamphlet that you need to go get, which I encourage you, actually, all you guys to go read. Go read it. 54 pages. It's an easy read. You can knock it out in 30, 45 minutes, maybe an hour. It'll give you a really good look at what the little season eschatology is. And then you can compare it to scripture yourself. Matter of fact, go read Tracy Liebman's book where she goes line by line throughout his book and shows through hermeneutics how none of it works. And interestingly enough, her book ends up being around 160 something pages. So it lets you know that they want you to get the easy read to get you in the door to sucker you into the little season eschatology. Whereas when you look at something that has been built on hermeneutical knowledge, it's a longer read. But I'm going to encourage you guys to read both of them. So, Mysterious Robert. So where is Jesus now? Again, we don't know because the Bible does not give us any details of where he and the saints go after the millennial reign comes to an end. But it seems unlikely it would be a physical place on earth that is accessible or even perceivable by us. The saints that rule with Christ during the millennial reign will most likely be spiritually hidden somewhere with Jesus and will reappear at the appointed time. There's that verbiage again. Seems unlikely, most likely, conjecture after speculation. No clue. Hey, let's throw it at the wall and see what sticks. He says, I do find it interesting that the northern lights appear to be exactly the same color as God's throne, as described in Revelation 4:3. And he that sat was to look upon like a jasper and a sardine stone, and there was a rainbow round the throne in sight like unto an emerald. So he's saying that the northern lights, the aurora borealis, is the throne of Christ, and that the kingdom of Christ is in the North Pole. And we're going to get deeper on how they think this is possible. We're told that after Satan is done deceiving the world and has risen upon his army, who will number as the sands of the sea. And oddly enough, Robert brings that up, and somehow they can't figure it out later. He then surrounds the camp of the saints, which many interpret literally. They went up on the breadth of the earth and compassed the camp of the saints about in the beloved city, and fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. Again, when Satan And this is the real little season I'm talking about, not the one that's being talked about now. But when it happens, he's going to gather the people together who don't want to follow Christ anymore and going to send them after Christ and the saints in Jerusalem, in actual Jerusalem, not the North Pole. And when they get close to the city, God's going to send fire and judgment out of the sky and light them up before they even get there. So really, all Satan's getting out for is just a little bit of time to grab the people who are against Christ anyway, and just to basically get them burned up. Hey, I'm taking more people down with me. I already know I'm losing. I've been locked up for 1,000 years anyway. So I'm just going to take as many people down as I can. So Robert doesn't really have an idea of what the camp of the saints are. He says it could be a literal place with Jesus, and then it's when he starts getting into the ideas of the North Pole. Or he said it could be genuine believers who are alive now, and they represent the camp of the saints because it feels like at times we're being surrounded. Well, no, duh, man. We're going to be surrounded if we're followers of Christ. The enemy doesn't like that. Demons don't like that. It's just, yes, totally agree with that, but do not agree with your idea of camp of the saints. So let's look deeper into this idea of the North Pole. So the idea of the aurora borealis, it is the natural light display in the sky caused by the sun's charged particles colliding with gases in Earth's atmosphere. Solar wind, which carries these particles, interacts with the Earth's magnetic field, funneling the particles towards the poles where they excite atmospheric gases like oxygen and nitrogen, causing them to glow in various colors. So obviously, little seasons for the most part are flat earthers, so they got to find what the aurora borealis is. And they haven't been able to explain this without being convoluted the entire time. And this is a good reason for it. It's God's throne. It's in the North Pole. That's what it is. Now we got a reason for it. Now we know what it is. We know what the lights are. It's God's throne. So they also get this from Ezekiel 1:4. I looked and I was a windstorm from the north, a huge cloud with flashing lightning and surrounded by brilliant light. So they try to cherry pick this verse out to say that the windstorm from the north and this lightning surrounded by brilliant light is the aurora borealis, is actually the throne of God, and that God's kingdom is in the North Pole. Now, I do believe there's some weird stuff going on in the North Pole, and I'm going to talk about exactly one of those things here in a minute, but I don't think it's good at all, and I don't think it's Christian. So let's get into that too. Also, there are people who think that Santa Claus is a perverted inversion of God with traits of omnipresence and judgment. I don't disagree with Santa Claus isn't pagan, because he is, but they want to say that it was created to mock Christ and the saints who are hiding out up in the North Pole, that Santa is the inversion of Jesus. And this is what they created during this modern Satan's little season to throw us off the trail. And they do talk about some old maps, one specific one, and this mountain that is in the North Pole, and it's surrounded and divided by 4 rivers. And where we get this idea and this map from, there is a phantom island or black rock in the North Pole, supposedly called the Rupus Nigra, and Gerardus Mercator, and he was a Flemish geographer, cosmographer, and cartographer. And he's most renowned for creating the 1569 world map based on new projection, which represented sailing courses of constant bearing as straight lines. And interestingly, he drew a map, and we'll show it up here on the screen if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble, but he drew a map from a lost work called Inventio Fortunata. It featured this massive black rock, and it featured these 4 countries, and in the midst is a whirlpool into which these 4 indrawing seas, which divide the north, funnel into. And to the right, underneath the pole, there was a bare rock in the midst of the sea. Check this out now. The circumference was 33 French miles, and it was all of magnetic stone. And this was word for word what Mercator said he copied from author Jacobus Noyen years ago. Guess who he wrote this letter to when he was describing all this? John Dee, the occultist. A magnetic stone 33 French miles in the North Pole, black. You could even tie that into the Black Rock Company, which pretty much owns everything in the world right now. And this is a whole other rabbit hole, guys. And this is one of those topics I told you, kind of like Petra and Darren Kuyu, that I want to touch later. And I may go into Saturn and all of these different things that tie into a black rock or black stone. But Rupes Nigra, that Mercator, writes a letter to John Dee about somehow this has now been bogarted into Christianity, saying that Christ's throne is in the North Pole. Well, that's a very occult stone that also was drawn in a map by Mercator from what he heard. Now, again, what he heard from Jacobus Noyen. Now, again, it could just be hearsay. He did travel the world, and we don't know how close he got to this. We don't know if he actually saw it. But, and again, Little Seasons will probably try to argue and say, well, yeah, they had to write that because they want to disrupt what is really going on in the North Pole. I don't know. That's pretty specific. 33 French miles, very occult by nature in its root core. And he's sending this letter to John Dee, so John Dee can know about this. Again, I don't think anything good's going on in the North Pole in the slightest, just like I don't think anything is good going down in the South Pole either, in the slightest. So, no, I don't think that Jesus and the saints are hiding out in the North Pole, pagan halos on their heads. Make it make sense. Let's talk about Zechariah 14:4. And this is when Jesus comes back. And his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west. And there shall be a very great valley, and half of the mountain shall remove toward the north, and half of it toward the south. We've got pictures of the Mount of Olives. Is it split down the middle, and there's a giant valley in the middle of it? We're going to show pictures here on YouTube and Rumble now. No, it's not. Satan get his satanic landfill company and fill it up with dirt and rock, put it back together so he could trick us? Come on, guys. This is what has to happen. These are the things that have to take place for the cover-up to be real. Now, let's get into Satan's Independence Day. And this is one that I heard, and I said, man, if I wasn't rooted in the word and if I didn't look at things with a critical mind, it would sound real sexy. So, according to Little Seasonist, in 1776, which was America's Independence Day, also when the Bavarian Illuminati, oddly, was created as well. And again, that's a whole different discussion, because I'm not saying that there isn't a correlation there. There's a lot going on in 1776, by the way. But according to Little Seasonist, 1776 was the day that they suggest that Satan had his Independence Day from the 1,000-year reign. Where did they get this idea from? Well, Independence Day. That's it. That's literally where they get the idea from. They heard Independence Day and they said, well, the Illuminati was created the same year. Oh, Satan was loose that day. That's it. We've got it. We know. And I know people right now are listening to this, and if they're Little Seasons, they're hopping mad. Well, how do you know it's not? How do you know that it is? That's the thing. I've gone through so much already to showcase how we're not in a Little Season for this just to be an icing on top of ridiculousness. So where do they get it nailed down that this is exactly when Satan was released? So they get it from this idea that the Statue of Liberty is a statue that was created from a painting called Satan's Calling His Legions. And I'm going to break down the painting, which its completion date was in 1796 to 1797-ish. That's around the time it was completed. And Thomas Lawrence was the guy who painted it, and he was an English painter who served as the fourth president of the Royal Academy. He was actually a child prodigy. He was born in Bristol, and his father was an innkeeper at the Bear Hotel in Market Square, and he actually supported his family with pastel portraits. He was such a good painter at such a young age. Did some research. There's no tie-ins with him in any secret society or anything like that. As a matter of fact, he drew this interesting painting, and it was inspired by John Milton's epic poem Paradise Lost. And it was funny because when he said he was going to do it, they didn't think that he could because his style differed so much from what he ended up doing on this painting called Satan Calling His Legions. Well, I'm going to show you the cropped version that's circulating the internet right now, where it shows the Statue of Liberty next to the painting. And if you look at the cropped version, it looks very similar, as a matter of fact. And the idea that the Statue of Liberty is Lucifer and how that it represents his release in 1776 is because of the painting that looks kind of like him. And then the shackles being broken at the feet of the Statue of Liberty, which, man, listen, it sounds fantastic if you're just listening to it on face value. Oh, the shackles are broken. They're showing you that he was loosed. Again, when the painting was painted and a statue was done, it wasn't in 1776. It was later, but obviously you could say that, oh, they were just painting what they already knew. Okay. So let's get into what the Statue of Liberty actually represents. And it is a cult in nature, but it's not Lucifer. It's not Satan. And it's going to tie more into the things I've been talking about on this show when it comes to the occult and Gnostic ideology. Who was the sculptor? So Frédéric Bartholdi, and he was a French sculptor and painter. He's best known for designing Liberty Enlightening the World, better known as the Statue of Liberty. But it wasn't proposed by him. As a matter of fact, it was proposed by a Edouard de Laboulaye, and he was a French jurist, poet, author, and anti-slavery activist. He was an observer of the political life of the United States, an admirer of the American Constitution, and he originated the idea of a statue presented by the French people to the United States that resulted in the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor. So, what was the common thread between Frédéric Bartholdi and Edouard de Laboulaye? Well, guess what? They were Freemasons. As a matter of fact, Laboulaye belonged to the Lodge Alsace-Lorraine in Paris, and he hit up Freemason Bartholdi to make this giant statue to send to the United States because, I don't know, Laboulaye loved the idea of the American Constitution. I'm sure he did, because a lot of it was created by Freemasons, and they were all connected, especially at that level of where these guys were at in these secret societies. So again, the idea of the Statue of Liberty being Lucifer on face value could make sense, but that's not what she represents. And we will talk about the inversion, because people will say, she doesn't really look like a female. She looks a lot like a man. And that's where they get the idea of Lucifer. And they're not wrong, but it represents the inversion in a different way. So who was the deity that it represent? Well, Bartholdi referred to her as Libertas, but she was an early adoption by Romans of the Babylonian goddess Ishtar. And I've talked a lot about the Queen of Heaven. Ishtar, most ancient of times, was referred to by the Sumerian dialect as Inanna, meaning the Queen of Heaven or Lady of Heaven. Canaan, the deity, was Ashtaroth. We talked a lot about Ashtaroth. We talked about Ashtaroth Carmen. We talked about the Nephilim that came out of Ashtaroth Carmen. The Hittites called her Sheushka. The Phoenicians called her Astarte. We talked about Astarte. Isis was the name that the Egyptians gave her. We know that the Greeks came along and called her Aphrodite, and we know the Romans came along and called her Venus. All of these are names for the same deity, the Queen of Heaven, the goddess. This is who the Statue of Liberty represents. The mother of harlots, they also call her. Also considered the mother of exiles. And Ishtar was known as that throughout not only Babylon and Babylonia, but also later on Assyria, Egypt, Greece, and Rome, all by different names that we've already talked about. If you go back to the cult of Inanna, Ishtar, there were a lot of sexual rites, including homosexual, transsexual priests and sacred prostitution. And that was actually continued to the East Semitic-speaking people who succeeded the Sumerians in the region. Also, androgynous and hermaphroditic men were heavily involved in this cult of Inanna Ishtar. During these Sumerian times, these priests were known as Gala, and they took female names and they spoke in the Emitsal dialect, what was traditionally reserved for only women to speak. And then they engaged in activities that would be considered homosexual. And even during the Akkadian period, the servants of Ishtar dressed in female clothing and performed war dances in Ishtar's temples. So we know that the Queen of Heaven generally has male priests who dress like women and perform these sexual rituals to her. Now, this is all historical, and this ties directly into Libertas, which Bartholdi created to send to America as a symbol of freedom, which honestly, I believe was a symbol of captivity, even though the shackles were broken, really just shackling us up, which I completely agree with. But what I don't agree with is that this symbol was of Lucifer. No, this symbol was of the Queen of Heaven. And this ties right into Gnosticism, ties right into the divine feminine, because this is the divine feminine, Sophia. This is Inanna, Ishtar, Isis, all the way down to Libertas. That's what this symbolizes. And yes, if the priests throughout history were also males dressing like women, performing these sexual acts, these rites towards their God, again, historically, then wouldn't the Statue of Liberty also represent that? Of course it would. That's why the Statue of Liberty looks very male-like, not because it's Lucifer and it's tied into some painting. By the way, I'm going to show you right now both pictures of the full pictures of the Statue of Liberty and the painting of Lucifer side by side. And you'll see how different they are when they're not cropped up and stuck together to made to be looked alike. Outside of maybe the face, they don't look alike at all. No shackles of the feet in the painting. The painting of Lucifer is not holding up a torch, just holding up his hand. And in the other hand is a spear. Not the same thing. But yeah, when you crop it up and throw it out there and it hits social media, everybody's like, oh, it is. And then little Caesarists grab it and somehow it becomes that 1776 was the day that Satan was released. Whew. Stretch after stretch after stretch after ad hoc, consistently. So now we want to get into the last two items, which are some of the wildest stuff I've ever heard. And now you're probably sitting there listening right now and saying, how could it get any wilder? Oh, it can. Now, this was the one that really had my head spinning. So this is all built around hagiography. And I have used hagiography a lot throughout my show, specifically when I was getting into Saint Christopher, the dog-headed man, and some of these other saints throughout history. And if you don't know, hagiography is a biography of a saint or ecclesiastical leader, as well as, by extension, idealized biography of a preacher, priest, founder, saint, monk, nun, or icon in any of the world's religions. So it'll be a figurehead of any religion, it's not just Christianity, and they will write all of these things about them. Sometimes they border on the side of fantastical. Some of them are just really wild. Not saying that they're not true, some of them. I believe people have been able to do some fantastical things with the power of God and with the power of Satan, for that matter. So it doesn't mean that all these hagiographies are fake. As a matter of fact, there is what is considered to be a hagiography written about L. Ron Hubbard that was compiled by the Church of Scientology. So even that's considered a hagiography, but they say that that's heavily fictionalized. Who knows, right? I mean, L. Ron Hubbard was involved in a lot of wild stuff with Jack Parsons. So I don't put it out of the realm of possibility that some of these things weren't true. Maybe it was looked at through a different world lens than I would look at it as, but it's possible, right? I was really interested because I got sent a Little Season video from a friend of mine, and he said, man, you got to check this out. This is the wildest thing I've ever heard in my life. And he wasn't buying into it by any stretch. He just said, this is just wild. And I said, okay, well, let me check it out. I want to look into it. And it was several people involved with it. And they said they had found what they think to be hagiography records of the Camp of Saints in the North Pole, the saints being light beings, and that the Little Season actually happened. So at this point, I'm saying, whoa, this is interesting. And I love hagiography, so I really very interested to see what they might have found. I'm thinking that they found some old documents. And when my friend sent it, he suspected that these were old documents that they had translated using AI from a different language. And to get to that point, I talked to this friend, and his name's Juan Ayala, by the way. And for people that know, I've worked with him over several years. And he was on the episode, Was Jesus a Homunculus? Which is very interesting. If you want to go check that out, which I don't believe he is, guys. If you're just joining me for the first time, he's not. But this was a whole exercise in showing what some of these early alchemists were trying to say about Jesus. He has actually translated documents that were completely from another language that did not have an English translation to it. So he broke down to me this entire process of how that would have to work. He said, one, AI isn't good enough to get the translation completely right. He said, so you really need to pay somebody who specifies not only in that language, but the time period that the document was written in, because they would need to have the ability to not only translate the language, but translate it for that time period. Because we know that dialects change over time too. We know Old English was a way that people used to speak. We don't speak like that anymore. That's why the original King James is tough for some people to be able to read comparative to some of the more modern translations. So I go down this whole road before I even watch this episode that's put out about hagiography and these hidden documents to prepare myself. Say, man, they must have gone through a lot of effort to get these documents transcribed. Well, I get into it about 10 minutes in. That's not what happened at all. It's not even close. This is wild, guys. And this right here will let you know the extent that Little Seasonists are willing to go to make this work. So the one guy who's bringing the documents, he says, and I'm not lying here, guys, this is what he says. He says that he's found a way to get AI, he's trained it to tap into the Vatican hidden library. And what he's been able to pull are these fragments from these documents that are from books that were written during Millennial Reign, some of them right at the onset, some of them during. And he said that he knows well enough the AI, if it starts deviating off into a more quote unquote mainstream way of giving him information, he prays over it and then it corrects itself. I would just want to say, because I'm very familiar with AI and dictating what you need it to do. Obviously, AI can be used for some very good things, not using it as a divination tool, obviously, but if you need to get information or if you're using it as a tool to be able to break apart information or whatever else, you still got to go through it, right? So I know that you can train AI to do whatever you want. You could train AI to not give you a more mainstream answer. We know that. Grok does that now. Grok has a whole conspiracy section of it now where you can just ask it conspiracy questions and it'll spit back what you want to hear. So I'm already on alert right now. And the crazy thing was, and I know some of these guys are really good guys, they were so excited. I watched one of the guys say, if this is true, this is the smoking gun we've been looking for. We've been looking for the smoking gun. My question is, why are you looking for a smoking gun? Why is this theory so important to you that your whole life revolves around this theory? Why are you not trying to live your life for Christ, live your life to connect to others, to do good in this world? But no, you're consumed with this. And that's what I've seen with Little Seasons. They are absolutely consumed with this to where the Bible's taken a back seat. It's not even the most important thing anymore. So he says he's got this document, and I found the document. It's on Scribe. So if you guys are looking for it, and I'll tell you what to type in to find it at the end when I go through some of the excerpts from it. But there are two versions. There's a 140-page version, and then there's a 167-page version, which was an addended version that there were some additions added to it. So the guy is basically saying, trust me, bro, that I trained the AI to hack into the Vatican secret files, which I don't know, guys. I kind of think the Vatican probably has a firewall protection system that would be far beyond what any of us could train an AI to hack into. Just me saying that. I don't know. I don't know a lot. Just a thought. So he gets into the document, and as he opens the document, there seems to be somebody manipulating it that's in the document too. So one of the guys says, is this an open source document? What's going on here? And he says, I don't know. He's like, see, they're already trying to change it on us. And then I happened to read the comments because I had to, and people were buying it. And I'm not saying these guys were up to something nefarious, but maybe it was an open source document. Maybe the guy presenting it to the people who wanted to buy into it, maybe he didn't have the best intentions. But I'm not just going to see somebody doing something in a document and then buy into the fact that, oh, it's being manipulated. No, I'm going to ask a question. This is weird. First off, I wouldn't even do a show like that without thorough investigation on this document, where it came from, and does it match up to anything legitimate in history. But again, history's been manipulated, so it doesn't matter. We're at the point now where we're just going to believe what AI spits out at us. The source text citing this document say that some of the excerpts in there are likely from the 7th and 8th century authorship, and this happened during this little season. So let's read some of these documents that they say they found. And they're not full documents, guys. It'll be what the document is, who supposedly wrote it, and when it was supposedly written. And then it'll just be a short paragraph or excerpt, and it will all prove the little season. So let's look at from the Codex Lucius, Testimonium Sanctorum Transfiguratorum. And this was written by Bolandist, and this was May, volume 3 of 1680. So for the record, I went and looked, and there's no such thing as a Codex Lucius. As a matter of fact, when I went in the search engine, any search engine, and type it up, the search engine or even AI will direct you to this document, which is super wild. It's directing people to an AI-generated document, which I absolutely believe it's AI-generated. This is not them hacking into the Vatican files, guys. So here's the excerpt. Following the darkness that covered the sun for 17 months, we're talking about 536 to 537 AD, which we just talked about, 7 brothers at the monastery of Monte Cassino underwent transformation while at prayer. Their bodies, through remaining tangible, emitted light comparable to bright lamps, requiring no candles for night offices. Most remarkably, they declared with one voice that this manifestation signified the beginning of the 1,000 years when Satan is bound, as foretold by the Apostle John. Trust me, bro, that's true. Seriously, wild. So let's look at another one. This is from the literal Vatican Library, and this was Cardinal Baronia's papers, supposedly. The map shows lands now covered by western seas that shall briefly emerge again when the millennium reaches completion. Most notably, the distance between Hibernia and the western continent is shown as merely 7 days sailing when these ancient roads reappear. The northern passage marked in red indicates the primary route by which the faithful shall journey to the sanctuary when the enemy is loosed. So, their new idea is the faithful, a lot of them tried to get away and get to the north to hide from Satan. They were keyed off. They ran and hid, but that doesn't make sense because a bunch of them got captured too. So the whole thing's convoluted. But again, this is in these supposed excerpts that were pulled out using an AI-generated program that was prayed over. We've got Acta Sanctorum Glorificatorum by von Eckert, and this was supposedly in 1723. After the Great Darkness, and it continually goes back to 536 to 540 AD. Again, they used that as the time when there was the tribulation and there was the judgment of people during the tribulation, which makes no sense because it's not even 7 years. But again, time's so convoluted. And if you're just buying into guys like Fomenko and Heinsohn, then you'll just buy into this too. After the Great Darkness, accounts from throughout Christendom reported saints manifesting glorified bodies while still living among mortals. These transformed ones exhibited qualities described by Paul: incorruptibility, luminosity, and extraordinary powers. They organized a parallel governance during the 1,000 years of Satan's binding, preparing sanctuaries that would receive the faithful when millennium concluded, and the dragon was briefly released. And it says briefly released, so that doesn't account for 250 to 300 years either. But again, this is not even real. It's not even in the possibility of being real. And let's listen to Johannes Trithemius, and he was a German Benedictine abbot and polymath who was active in the German Renaissance. And guess what he was? An occultist. He was a big-time occultist. He wrote 3 volumes about magic and specifically using spirits to communicate over long distances. And in this 3rd book of this 3-book series, Agrippa and John Dee led credence to the idea of mystical, magical foundation. That's where they got their ideas from. So Johannes is quoted in this supposed hidden Vatican documents that were pulled out by an AI program that was prayed over by a supposed Christian that proves the little season. Let's see what Johannes said in the private papers. And the name of it is Mysterium Civitatis Sanctorum. The city where glorified saints dwell during the 1,000 years moves between physical and celestial realms according to celestial cycles. When fully manifested on earth, it stands at the northern axis, surrounded by mountains of crystal that capture aurora light. So playing right into kingdom being in the North Pole, that the aurora borealis is just the light emanating from the throne of Jesus. Those permitted entry describe structures built without joints or seams, halls that adjust their dimensions according to need, and gardens yielding fruit representing all knowledge from Adam to the present age. Most importantly, the city contains the archives recording all events of the millennium and calculations for recognizing signs of the enemy's release. Okay, woe on a few fronts. One, very convenient that everything that was written lines up to what you believe is happening in North Pole. Number 2, if this was real, are we going to trust Johannes, a known occultist who Agrippa and John Dee followed after? What are we really talking about here, guys? This is wild. And the reality is most people that want to buy into the little season that would read this document would just buy into what this excerpt said and not even know who Johannes actually was, that he was an occultist that was tied into John Dee. They wouldn't even think to look it up. They wouldn't even want to look it up. But I knew some of these names immediately when I saw them. Here's another good one. So this one's called Narratio Lemurcae at Atlantis Resurgentium. And in parentheses, it says, cited in John Dee's Libri Mysteriorium in the British Library. Let's read the excerpt first, and I'm going to get into how this is absolutely ridiculous. According to the Council of Transformed Ones, apparently that's the saints, who govern during the millennium, the configuration of lands before the flood shall temporarily return when Satan's binding ends. So that's describing why the land has been put back together, because they're going to put it back together real quick before Satan's release ends. So then we're double tricked. So even Christ is tricking us, according to John Dee. The continent called Lemuria in eastern oceans and Atlantis in western waters will briefly emerge, allowing final gathering of faithful to the North Sanctuary. So this Lemuria is going to pop up. A bunch of saints are going to jump on there and then run away. Ancient roads across what are now ocean floors will be revealed, marked by structures built by antediluvian giants. These paths converge at the circular city, where the black rock, we already talked about this, Rupes Nigra, stands at Earth's northern axis, the last defense against Gog and Magog. So they are tying in all the stuff with these supposed hidden documents. So that's just wild in and of itself. And the fact that people would read this and believe that this AI hacked into the Vatican documents to get this is just, I mean, guys, I can't even describe how ridiculous this is to even verbalizing this to you. So I wanted to know, was this document actually cited in John Dee's Libri Mysteriorium? And I went and downloaded the PDF for John Dee's 5 books of mystery, which it's called. And it's an original source book for Enochian magic that John Dee and Edward Kelly were able to receive from these fallen angels, and they were able to write down. So in the 5 books of mystery, it served as a diary that John Dee was writing in from 1581 to 1583. And he was documenting a lot of these interactions that were going on and these magic rituals. He's putting them in these 5 books. So I wanted to look, was this document cited in John Dee's 5 books of mystery? Absolutely not. It's not even anywhere to be found. The document doesn't exist. I went through it. It's not there. It's not even talked about in the slightest. So tell me how I'm supposed to believe that AI is pulling out hidden documents from the Vatican if when I look at it and go through it, it's not there. Supposedly the document that's cited in the 5 books of mystery by John Dee. It's not there. And supposedly John Dee wrote this. Why would John Dee, who's an occultist through and through, and all of these occultists apparently are writing this stuff, and they're mapping out when the saints are leaving and how it's going to happen, how would they have knowledge of this? And honestly, I thought a lot of these guys didn't even really exist because we're talking about a time period that didn't happen. Remember, 700 to 1,000 years that doesn't exist? Guys, what are we doing? And what are we doing as Christians? This is insane. And guys, if you're looking for the document, I encourage you to go look for it. You can find it on Scribed, and there's 2 versions. I told you there's the 140 page and then the 167 page. It's called hagiographies. And then in parentheses, it says stories of saints revised with sources. Who are these sources? It's definitely not the sources that they're telling you. I can promise you that. But the fact that this exists out there as a podcast for people to listen to become deceived is beyond me. And how as Christians we're even allowing this? And again, I don't even think the guys pushing this out there are doing it in a nefarious manner. I just think they're so desperate for this thing to be proved and get the smoking gun that they're willing to take whatever they can. And that brings us to our last point, Sikhism. So there are a contingent of people within the little season that think that Sikhism was a form of Christianity during the Millennial Reign. They think there were multiple versions of Christianity during the Millennial Reign. No, there would just be it, and that's it. What are we talking about here? But let's go through Sikhism so we can really look at what it is and what the belief system is, and then we can match it up to the Bible and say, does it hold weight? So Sikhism is an Indian religion and philosophy that originated in the Punjab region of the Indian subcontinent around the end of the 15th century AD. It's one of the most recently founded major religions and among the largest in the world, with about 25 to 30 million adherents known as Sikhs. Now, the pronunciation of Sikh or Sikhism is what we say in the Western world, but in the Eastern world, they say Sikhs or Sikhism. But I'm going to continue to say Sikh or Sikhism because I don't want you to think that I'm talking about people who are sick. So just so you know, Sikhism developed from the spiritual teachings of Guru Nanak, the faith's first guru, and the 9 Sikh gurus who succeeded him. The 10th guru, Guru Singh, named Guru Granth Sahib, which is the central religious scripture in Sikhism, as his successor. This brought the line of human gurus to a close. Sikhs regard Guru Sahib as the 11th and eternally living guru. So he is living in a spiritual essence around us. So that is obviously definitely Gnosticism through and through. And as a matter of fact, we're going to get into them believing in reincarnation here in a bit, and how your body has to reincarnate enough times to be able to get to the ascension. What all Gnosticism is, right? We got to get past the demiurge to move into the next stage. So it is a monotheistic religion, and they believe only one God exists, but he simultaneously is within everything and is all-encompassing. The oneness of God is reflected by the phrase Ik Onkar. In Sikhism, the word for God is Waheguru, which means wondrous teacher. In the literal sense, and this is Gnosticism here too, God has no gender in Sikhism, but metaphorically, God is presented as masculine and God's power is feminine. So Guru Singh refers to God as his father and God's creative power as his mother. And this deity is also understood as the eternal, formless, timeless, and all-pervading creator and sustainer of the universe. God is considered as a singular, monotheistic being, a creator being who is beyond human comprehension and never takes human form as an incarnation. Let that last part sink in. God is considered a singular, monotheistic being, a creator being, who is beyond human comprehension and never takes human form as an incarnation. Wholly against Scripture. We know that Jesus was the incarnation of God. He was God. So that's not even close to being something that we should be following. And you're telling me that this was an offshoot of Christianity during the Millennial Reign? Just because they're monotheistic doesn't mean that they believed or even believe in a millennial reign. This is wild. And they're saying that Hinduism was an offshoot of that. We know that Sikhism is one of the newest religions that was ever formed. Oh, yeah. Inversion. You're not reading it right because this is what they did to corrupt it. So do the Sikhs believe in reincarnation? Actually, yes, they do believe in reincarnation. They believe in the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, known as samsara. Sikhs believe that the soul, or atma, transmigrates into a new body after death with the form of the new life determined by the karma gained in the previous life. The goal in Sikhism is to attain mukti, or liberation from this cycle, devotion to God, and living a righteous life, eventually leading to the soul's union with the divine. So the cycle of samsara is seen as a continual cycle, like I said, of birth, death, and rebirth. The goal is mukti. So when you have achieved enough ascension here on earth after all these reincarnations, you can achieve mukti, or liberation, and that is your salvation by what? Merging back in with God. And that's Gnosticism 101. Merging back in with the monad, which most of them think that you can't even really get to. The idea that you can become ascended master. As a matter of fact, Sikhism talks about while a human form is the highest life form, the Atma may be reborn into animal forms if it has accumulated bad karma. Conversely, good karma can what? Lead to a higher life form. Ascended masters, secret chiefs. We're here again. And somehow this is a part of the little season? What are we talking about? I told you it was going to get wild today, guys. I told you this was going to be the wildest episode. And I hope that people are listening to this and have red flags going off like crazy. That literally have them going off like crazy. And listen, I've given you all the sources. Go hunt them down. Go find them. You can find them. I'm giving you the sources. And speaking of sources, because I've sourced everything throughout this entire series, there are 2 books I want you to go read. Again, I'm telling you, go read the little season stuff too. Make your own decision. There are 2 books that are really good at refuting the little series. One of them is by Ed Mabry, and it's called The Little Season of Satan, Hidden History or Hidden Agenda. I'm going to put a post up in YouTube in the post area where you can easily get access to where you want to buy the book. I'll put it in the show notes if you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, so you can easily get to the book. Ed is a great researcher, and his book's fascinating, and he really breaks down the hermeneutics of the text throughout. Also, go check out Tracy Liebens' Jesus Keeps His Word, Uncovering the Little Season Heresy. And she goes toe-to-toe with Mysterious Robert's book and literally breaks down the entire book and then uses what? Hermeneutics to go through the text to explain what these verses actually mean and how we're not in the little season. Guys, I really appreciate you sticking with me for over 12 hours of content. I'm sure most of the little seasoners ran off after 10 to 20 minutes of the first episode that I did. Don't see a lot of them being super genuine in challenging themselves, but at the same time, I hope some of them did. And for people that were on the fence or that weren't in that camp, I hope you have seen at least a different picture. And I hope to the ones that were already not in the camp, it solidified your faith a little more and you got something to point to. Hey, you can send people to my series on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever, and send the heat my way, because if they don't like it, then they'll for sure let me know, and they already have. So that's cool too. I can take all the ad hocs and ad hominems and ball it up in a ball and throw it over my shoulder, because at the end of the day, if I'm doing what I feel like God wants me to do, which I feel like I've done with the series, then I'll let the chips fall however they fall. And again, I appreciate you guys for being here. I had a blast doing this series. I've got another series coming up after this. It's going to be fascinating. And then another series lined up after that. So I've got some really interesting stuff. I've got a guest coming up that you guys know really well, and he's going to be having a blast with me on one of the series too. And if you can, go give a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, write a review on Apple Podcasts, go give me a 5-star review on Spotify. Make sure you're running those 5 stars up, guys. It helps get the show deeper into the algorithm so more people get it. Matter of fact, go share the show. Share the show everywhere you can. If you're on YouTube, go write a comment. People always forget to write comments in the comment section, the good comments, because people just hit like and they like it, but they don't write a comment. Write a comment. That also helps generate more eyes on the video, helps to get deeper in the algorithm as well, and more people can get to the show. Also, if you're looking for any merchandise to represent Free the Rabbits, go by freetherabbits.myshopify.com and you can pick up all kind of merchandise. We got some new stuff coming out too. And on the way out, we're going to play my song Plato's Cave. And you know what it is, guys. Go outside, touch grass, and get your tail out the hole.
I'm feeling what shocks us does a sin. We just love what's toxic and we binge. Think we're free when we're on the fringe. But we're lost, yeah we're lost, yeah we're lost. Ropes full of death and bones. Or all we leave when we chase the most. What we acquire will decompose. What do we want, do we want, do we want? Shadows dance on the cave from our masters. Fires closing in behind us, it don't matter. Puppets dancing to the flicker, hear the laughter. And we just think that it's normal in the pastures. Become our names into one. With the flames, with the flames. Jesus prayed in the garden while his friends slept. We're just broken pieces to the gold and no missteps. I'm here to break down all your idols, ritualistic. If you don't like it, I don't speak in euphemistic terms. The world is run by Charles Montgomery Burns. They keeping it hooded like CERN. They've done it in thirds before the earth was occurred. And all the friction I'm getting is warranted when your chambers don't echo. The insurance needed for what I be saying don't come from progressive or geckos. And why you popping Prosecco if you ain't putting in labor? I'm taking shots of espresso. Every second I favor more than the last. We never get a return on time lost with the divine laws, but people looking to wrap it like tacos with lime sauce. Hey, I never cared too much what they saying. Matter of fact, what I'm saying, I ain't here to explain it on the levels. All they see, but they don't see my creator campaign of politicians for your souls. No debating, but softer than eggs, I'm calling on Benedict Arnold. I got me a chopper. Most of our collars are blue. Most of us can't even afford one. Lining up for new iPhones and Jordans. It ain't our blessings and we praying for misfortunes. On others on our socials feeling so important. I'm breaking you down, ain't here to make you feel comfortable. Just avowing the opposite sex while creating the monsters haunting us. These hells we create for ourselves. Timelines are nothing but cells.